Previously on the Seventh Valkyrie, May and BC concoct a plan to help Cyrus better understand his newly awakened gift and re-enter the city on less suspicious terms. But in order to pull it off, it's going to take a little ingenuity, a couple of lies, and a whole lot of confidence. Find out next on the Seventh Valkyrie. Chapter 10. Surface Level. Cyrus. The 6th day of winter. Early morning. The first day after my arrival in Reen consisted mostly of me sleeping on the couch up in May's loft, wrapped up in her fur coat to keep as much of her scent on me as possible. It felt a bit wrong to be all snuggled up into a wolfskin pelt that, became May's skin at some point, but May didn't seem to think it was weird, and I was happy for the warmth. So I got over it. The expanse had gotten colder the further north we'd come, but now out on the coast I definitely noticed the full grip of early winter. Edarin seasons were the same as the Valgardians, but more extreme. That was another random fact that bubbled up to my brain midway through the afternoon, as I rolled over from a post-lunch nap into an early evening nap. It was a useful fact, I guessed, but mostly it reminded me how frustratingly little I remembered about home. But there was not much to do about that right now. A little after my early evening nap, when I was considering a mid-evening nap, BC came back with a little knotted string that she used to take a few of my measurements. When I asked her what she was doing, she simply answered, quote, "dressing you like a sexy little whore," which I thought was code from her to stop asking questions, but I guess that was just the way things went around here. Then May came back with dinner, and talked to me a little bit about Reen, and Flare, where I was going to be living. May had taken a secret way to enter Velvet, as one of the pit leaders bringing in a strange boy was destined to draw at least some attention. So we had to pull off a bit of trickery so that I could get out undetected and come back somewhat legitimately. That part of the plan would come the next morning. As the evening went on, May had told me a bit about the news from the day. That morning, the Edarins had put up a line of barges across the river, and combined with their efforts to rebuild the bridge, which had been a big part of the city before the war, May suspected that Edera was getting ready for some sort of power play, or at least an attempt to gain more control of Reen, if not the old city itself. The history of Nazarene, which May explained was the old city name for the whole bay, was tied to the fact that it sat right at the edge of the Mandarian, the biggest river on the Edarin continent. The Mandarian ran down from the Mandarian highlands around Mandus. You could see where all the names came from, where it collected size and picked up smaller rivers until it emerged on the coast. Since water was the easiest way to transport big things, or large amounts of things, Reen's position at the mouth of the Mandarian made it super important. Barges coming down the river would be unloaded, and their cargo, whether that was people or products, would be transferred onto ships that were more suited for travel across the ocean. From the ocean, the same would happen in reverse, where goods and people would be loaded onto barges and vessels headed back upriver that would be pulled by oarsmen, oxen, or Freelander powers. Along the way, the entire operation, transfer from river to ocean and ocean to river, was watched closely by the forces that controlled each side. To the north was the Edarin military, who called their part of the land the New City, and the four families controlled the south, which they called the Old City. Now, if you tried to get too far back in any type of Edarin or Freelander history, you ran into a bit of a wall around the Shattering. There still seemed to be lots of stories about the Shattering, but the world before that was a little unclear. However, for the centuries of more recent history since the Shattering, it seemed that Nazarene had been occupied by both Freelanders and Edarins, who had actually done a pretty good job staying to their respective sides of the river. It was about 100 years before I'd arrived in Edera, where there had been an unprecedented agreement to open trade and movement through something called the Mandarian Crossing, a bridge built using Edarin engineering and Freelander gifts. Apparently, after that, things had been great for a while. No one complained about who they worked with when everyone in Nazarene was making tons of money. and the presence to this day of dozens of nationalities, tribes, and elemental affinities within the Old City reflected what Nazarene had been before the war, a massive gathering place of Freelanders. But when the war had started, the Mandarian crossing had been destroyed, and what movement or trade happened between the two cities now was done under the table in complete secrecy. Which did not mean that it didn't happen. After all, the four families were experts at moving products of all sorts deep into Edera, with Edera being none the wiser. But all of that apparently got way more complicated with the river blockaded, for both the Ederans and the four families. In the years after the war, there had been rumors that there might one day be trade and movement between old and new cities again, which everyone agreed would make them all a lot of money, but the distrust after the war between both groups ran very, very deep. It was a quandary. According to May, for all that Ederans could be hateful, Edera was a strong, stable country that actually had some use to a lot of the Freelanders. They were an outlet for trade thanks to their large population, and their currency was very common and universally accepted. They built cities and roads and bridges and ports that many Freelanders took advantage of, and they were a great place to purchase goods, especially anything that needed to be complex or manufactured, since the Ederans had the best engineers and builders and gadget men. Where things had gone wrong, it seemed, in these two cultures trying to come together was the Ederan love for growth, and a pervasive belief that the full expanses of the continent were well within Ederan rights to claim. This was disputed, obviously, sometimes politically, sometimes peacefully, most often violently, whenever they collided with the ancestral and wildlands where Freelanders had chosen to dwell. Bringing this all back to Reen, those tensions had been brought to a boil about 10 or so years ago with the arrival of what the Ederans called Apostolos, a massively powerful, gifted entity that had come from beyond the Endstorm and blazed a trail of destruction across half of Edera. That had whipped up the entirety of the southern borderlands into a frenzy. Edera had then retaliated against all of the Freelanders. War had come, Freelanders from Uvera and the other nations beyond the wasteland had charged in to support them, and then with the death of Apostolos, or at least who the Ederans called Apostolos, the Ederans had seized control of Heaven's Gate and the rest of the Borderlands again, giving us the current situation. There were lots and lots of details that May kept going into, stuff like the fact that some Freelanders lived throughout Edera, that basically every town and city had different rules and cultural understandings for how its people could coexist, the fact that there were still wildlands like the Expanse that even Edera couldn't touch. But eventually my eyes had started to droop, and May had wished me a good night and left out to more meetings, telling me that BC would wake me and escort me in the morning. And that was what brought us to right now. It was well before dawn the next morning when BC came in and woke me up. May, it seemed, still hadn't returned, and BC was dressed in a suit of deep purple, hair tied back in a ponytail and holding a bag. It was only then that I realized that when BC said she'd, quote, be dressing me like a pretty little whore, that she hadn't been messing with me and had been telling me exactly what she was going to be doing. There were long black stockings, heeled boots, a deep purple corset kind of thing covered in tassels and ribbons and rhinestones. I had a big purple scarf and an enormous coat that was at least 6 times as decadent as the one that May had been wearing when she'd left the night before. So this was the, trick that May mentioned? I said. Yep, BC said, as she slapped me on the back and tossed one of the bags up to May's loft. She lit a ferret. Get up there, pack your clothes in your own bag when you're done, and I'll make sure that gets to your spot and flare once you're settled. Then she'd laughed and chuckled as I examined the outfit and slinked into May's loft to put them on. I was pretty sure I was about as bright red as the outfit was purple when I came down, trying desperately to pull the clothes down and prevent various parts of me from being pinched and mushed into place. I expected a round of laughter from BC, maybe some mean comments, but instead she gave me a wrinkled brow and dragged me in front of the mirror in May's washroom to adjust me. My stockings weren't high enough. My boots weren't buckled right. My scruffy fuzz, which I'd thought was the start of a manly beard, needed to be trimmed and shaved. My single was too low and too loose, which didn't seem at all possible until she tightened the tassels and strings and my voice went up a few octaves. My scarf was there to cover my obnoxiously bright hair, which is her words, not mine, and then she finally put the coat around me, twisting me this way and that in front of the mirror and catching me when I tripped on the heels. I also expected that to get a laugh from her, but instead she just groaned and made me walk laps around the room, barking instructions until she was satisfied I could make it, well, wherever we needed to go. It was still dark as she led me out into Velvet, directly down the stairs through the dark, floral-scented club, which was one of the largest, most intricately constructed spaces I'd ever seen. Anywhere you looked, there were glowing amethyst stones and lanterns, and platforms to dance, and little passageways and curtains of silk and quiet areas hidden away from the world. 1,000 people could have been here in 1,000 different conversations, and felt like they were all by themselves, but also together? I don't know. I didn't quite understand the vibe of the space, but BC cut a straight path through all of it, steering me past a few of the lingering security guards with quiet words to me and harsh, teasing complaints at the men. For only the briefest moment, we stepped out of the front door of the club into the breezy stench of the pit, which I'd heard much about. But it was only a few steps, as BC led me to a pair of horses and a waiting carriage, where BC elegantly helped me into the comfortable warmth of the closed cabin. "Yeah, don't move the curtains," she said under her breath as she hopped into the driver's seat. "And don't say anything too loudly until I say you can. And if it's at all possible, please, can you try to keep your energy suppressed? I know you don't know how to do it, but just think it. Really trying not to have any trouble right now." Then she cracked the reins, and we were off, bumping across the cobblestones down through town. I still wasn't sure exactly how to suppress my energy, but I did try not to go, "Hey, Valguardian here," with my energy, which for me meant distracting myself with as many different random thoughts as I could. First, I scouted the inside of the carriage, which featured another big black bag, but was otherwise pristine. Then I just started randomly making noises and humming, until BC snapped at me to shut up, weaving me a nice little tapestry of swear words in a bunch of different languages that I thought was really impressive, and I don't think anyone else but me could have understood. Outside, it still seemed to be well before dawn, but there were a few people that BC hailed on her way, cracking jokes about morning wood and expensive tastes, and nodding back towards me as we wound our way down the slope towards the ocean. Want to know what happens next? Join us on Patreon to become a hero of Edera and get early access to episodes along with bonus features, director's commentary, and the full Tab to archive. You can also find other ways to support us at the links in the description, and we will see you next week.